Okay, good evening. Ako po si Butch Valdes. Ako po ang chairman ng Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino. Right now, going on online on Facebook and YouTube. Meron po tayong panauhin na gusto ko po ninyong makilala. Isa po ko pong matalik na kaibigan, a good friend from Leesburg, Virginia, who is one of the also close friends of Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, who just passed away I think about a day ago. No? So without much ado, I would like to welcome my friend, Mike Billington.
Thanks, Butch, and thanks for inviting me into the Philippines. This is a very sad day. In one sense, it's not a surprise. He's been failing for the last few months, but Lyndon LaRouche is unquestionably one of the key figures who in history will be seen as a solid force for the good in a period of unprecedented global crisis. And whether or not the world proceeds into disillusion, economic decay, possibly even global war, nuclear war, or if rather we counter this British imperial campaign to prevent what Mr. LaRouche has fought for these last 50 years, and which potentially can be implemented by the current president, President Donald Trump, who has made very clear throughout his campaign and throughout his presidency that he wants to bring the United States and Russia and China together to end this division of the world into imperial divide and conquer chaos, which was in fact leading us very, very rapidly towards war. I think the thing that might be most important to indicate was that when Mr. LaRouche was put in prison, put on trial during the 1980s, along with a number of his associates, including myself, that trial, which we called the third trial of Socrates, meaning that those people who fought to transform the world towards the good, like Socrates, like Christ, and others, and clearly like Lyndon LaRouche, were subjected to this kind of hysteria by an oligarchy who could not tolerate a force for the truth if they were to maintain their global power. This happened at the time that Ronald Reagan was president. And the attack on Lynn by the Justice Department and the corrupt networks in the Justice Department and the FBI, who was headed by a guy named Robert Miller, the same Robert Miller who's now running the special prosecution of Donald Trump on behalf of the British, who are frantically trying to stop Donald Trump. But the point of the trial against Lynn was pretty much for the same reason. It's that LaRouche had succeeded through his actual friendship with Ronald Reagan in convincing the president that rather than sitting on the brink of war through the mutual assured destruction policy of Russia and America aiming their nuclear weapons at each other, and the British argument was that this would prevent war because we both knew we could blow each other up. But in fact, its purpose was to make sure that we remained divided, that the world was constantly divided, and that surrogate wars in places like Africa and Vietnam and so forth would actually be wars between these two East versus West powers. And LaRouche circumvented that with his idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative, to have a space-based missile capacity worked on by both the Russians and the United States. Reagan adopted that idea. This led to his demise. He became the target of the British and their assets like Henry Kissinger in the United States, along with LaRouche. And in the case of LaRouche, he was actually put on trial and made up phony excuses to put him on trial And as you know, what's going on against Trump today is also just made up phony excuses by the same people in the same corrupt Justice Department who now stand exposed. The difference between now and then is that the American people, partially because they were lied to by the press, but they were not allowed to know what LaRouche actually represented and why the British and their stoolies in the U.S. were so frantic to stop him. Today, people do know. The attack on Trump, our organization, and you've helped in this, have exposed this corruption as a British operation, that the entire operation against Trump was set up by British MI6, Christopher Steele, who used assets in the United States and the fake news media, as Trump likes to call them, to peddle these lies. And it finally blew up in their face. And what we're seeing now is the potential that what LaRouche fought for these last 50 years, to bring about peace through development, and to emphatically to use culture as a key weapon, positive weapon within that fight, through a commitment to reviving classical music, ending the rock, drug, sex counterculture, the drug epidemic that's destroying our country and yours, which Mr. Duterte is fighting, and to counterpose to that a true renaissance of men, the great cultures of all the great societies, of the Chinese Confucian tradition, the Russian Vernadsky tradition, the Indian Gupta tradition, to bring these together to form who have always taught that people are different because of their ethnicity, their race, their cultures, and that never the twain shall meet, as they like to say, as a way of keeping people fighting each other so that the global financial oligarchy can continue their power over subjected, divided people. We're at the point at which it's going to be decided one way or the other for mankind as a whole, whether the great ideas that Lyndon LaRouche, drawing on the great ideas of the great men in culture, of Leibniz and Cusa and Confucius, brought about this movement, which is now alive and well. And Mrs. Helga Zepp LaRouche, who, as you know, is known as the Silk Road Lady even in China, is continuing to lead this organization and to lead our work with the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, the Africans, the South Americans, the Asians, and throughout the United States. That Trump himself is surrounded by neoconservatives who do not agree with him. He's had to fight, by and large, with really support from a few people in his family and our organization organizing the American people and people around the world to recognize who he really is, that he does not know how to do what he wants to do, but that he's committed to it. And our responsibility is to mobilize the populations of our nation and of the world to join and to give him the political support that he needs to bring about this alliance and coalition between the great nations of the world to replace this bankrupt British imperial system of drugs and war, and perpetual warfare, and so forth. So this is, we happen to be having a national conference this weekend, just days after Mr. LaRouche's death, which would be obviously an extremely important event in New Jersey. So we're looking forward to that. It's going to be a 2-day conference this weekend to bring people together from all over the country and some from around the world in order to be prepared for the incredibly crucial nature of the coming weeks and months as the world is facing a final sort of, you might say, an end game of the Western oligarchy and the necessity of succeeding in bringing about this new paradigm for mankind.
Yes. Mike, we've been, of course, observing developments that have been going on in the United States because we realize that whatever happens in the United States will have a terrific, major impact on the rest of the world. And we see, of course, President Trump having to face many adversaries that it's all coming from all sides, including the people around him. Now, I was just, of course, wondering whether he will have the needed organizational support to push for the things that he wants to push. Obviously, there's something going on right now in Venezuela, and somebody named Bolton is trying to be the point man in getting rid of Maduro, and on the other hand, and at the same time, they're putting in this other guy to try to oust Maduro. What will happen if anything happens to Maduro and there is a overthrow of that president when President Putin of Russia, and I suppose even China is openly in support of President Maduro's administration. What will be the outcome as far as this?
Well, you know, this is not really a fight over Venezuela. It's part of the neoconservative crowd's effort to provoke a crisis with Russia and China. Mm-hmm. But I would say that when you said that China and Russia are supporting Maduro, mm-hmm. that's not really true. Uh-huh. They're supporting the government of Venezuela. Nice. They are not intervening in the situation. Mr. Putin has always said in regard to Syria, he said, I'm not supporting Assad. Mm-hmm. I'm supporting the government, whoever it may be, of Syria, because we respect sovereignty. Mm-hmm. We respect the sovereignty of the nation and that they have the right to decide how their government should be run, not a group of terrorists armed by the British and the United States, as what happened under Obama. Mm-hmm. And as you know, which is exactly the way they also destroyed Iraq and Libya, turned them into terrorist hellholes by destroying their sovereign governments, which were by and large openly supporting their nation against terrorism. And yet we used the so-called war on terror to overthrow those governments, to keep them backward. And they were trying to do the same with Syria, and Russia came in and defended the government, not Assad, but the government. Okay. He doesn't make that decision. In the case of Venezuela, Maduro, you know, he comes from the former Chavez government. Chavez himself was put in by foreign interests who mobilized to have him there for this purpose, in order to provoke a crisis between left and right, and to try to create a crisis which could be used to drag the United States into a horrible accident or mistake by intervening militarily in South America. I don't think Trump is going to do that. Mm-hmm. You have to look, and I hope your viewers have seen this. You look at what Trump is doing, for instance, with China, where he's on the brink of a tremendous agreement with Chinese. He praises Xi Jinping as one of the great leaders in the world. He praised his top economist who came over and met with him here in Washington just last week as one of the most respected economists in the world. And yet, his vice president, Pence, makes a speech about how Xi Jinping is the greatest dictator and aggressor in the world. What's going on? You have his own cabinet running around the world denouncing Russia and China. Mr. Pompeo, the Secretary of State, was just in Hungary denouncing Russia and China, while Trump repeats over and over, being a friend of Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. And he's on the brink of this tremendous deal with China. He's on the brink of another meeting with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And as he said recently, I believe in his State of the Union address, he said, I firmly believe, he said, that if I had not been elected, we would now be in a horrible war with North Korea. Because that was Obama's policy, was to do nothing until they had the nuclear weapons with which they could justify launching a war. Not really against North Korea, but against China and Russia. So the man has begun to bring peace to the world. You probably saw he announced we're going to pull our troops out of Syria, and both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress went absolutely crazy. No, you can't do that. We must have war, war, war. But he's standing his ground. As I said before, he doesn't know exactly how to do many of the things he knows has to be done. But he's acting alone, and he also has to be cautious. We know that other presidents who ran afoul of the British Empire were executed. You know, this is not executed, but assassinated.
Assassinated.
Yeah, this has been the history of the British killing American presidents. So he has to be cautious, but we cannot be cautious. I mean, we have to be cautious. I shouldn't say that. But we have to be very committed and aggressive in identifying the danger as coming from the dying empire, which is centered in London and Wall Street, a financial system that's now unraveling throughout the Western world. The nations of Europe are in total chaos. There is no functioning government, really, in France, in Germany, or in England. They're in absolute chaos. There's some stability because of a new government in Italy, which is standing up against this dictatorship of the European Union and committed to reestablishing ties with Russia and China to bring peace to the world through development. But by and large, Europe and the financial system in the West are on the brink of a horrendous breakdown. What Trump is doing with the economy is positive. He's done a few things like some taxes and some trade agreements, which have helped a little bit, but it's done nothing to remove the $1.5 quadrillion in gambling debts squatting on top of the U.S. and European economies, which can only be restored through what LaRouche, as you know, has called his 4 laws, through reviving the American system, the Hamiltonian system of economy, to put these banks through bankruptcy proceeding, to restore Glass-Steagall, to commit to a credit policy for our nation with national banking, which can finance the desperately needed infrastructure, which can relaunch our space program, which can carry out the building up of our nuclear and especially research into fusion and our space program. All of these things are within our grasp because we have a president who wants to do them. But we have to implement this policy, not only in America. It can only be done if we do it by bringing the great powers together, especially Russia and China and India, with the United States, to build this force, what we call the 4 powers, which has the necessary minimal strength to replace this bankrupt British imperial financial system and to truly bring about a global renaissance.
Talking about China, there is this ongoing trade drift between the two countries, U.S. and China. And President Trump has actually said that it is moving towards fruition, and things are going to be, there will be certain agreements. Now he was quite confident when he was saying this, and it was on the news. What is the real situation right now in as far as that's concerned?
What you said is absolutely right. He's committed to resolve. I mean, he had a serious problem with this trade deficit. You know, I mean, this was a huge deficit year after year after year, hundreds of billions of dollars, which had been allowed to happen. And as Trump has said many times, he said he doesn't blame China. China took advantage of presidents in the United States who were not thinking about our own development, but were thinking about how to make quick money by having industries move to China, using cheap labor, exporting their goods back to the United States. It led to a huge trade deficit, and Trump took it on. I'm not sure I agree with the exact methods he used. He used punitive tariffs, right? This is the way he works. I mean, there's nothing wrong with tariffs. He put tariffs on steel and aluminum because he wants to protect the American steel and aluminum industries. Those are useful. The punitive tariffs he was using because that's his negotiating way. He's a tough line, and then he works something out. And by the way, he said just today, or maybe it was late yesterday, that although March 1st is the deadline for increasing the tariffs on China, he says Nonetheless, we are very close to an historic deal, a deal which both we and China will benefit from, and the world. And therefore, I'm not going to be necessarily strict about this March 1st deadline if we're close to an agreement. And I'm quite certain that if they don't meet before then, he wants to meet personally with Xi Jinping and sign the final deal. It probably won't come till next month or even the following month. But in the meantime, he's going to Asia. He'll be meeting with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam on the 27th and 28th. And again, I remind your viewers that the only reason this tremendous breakthrough for peace in the Koreas took place is because Trump was not only willing, but actively working with Russia and China. And even Japan, who has served in the past, it served as sort of the major outpost for the sort of East-West divide, the American outpost in Japan, being an occupied country. But in the recent period, Prime Minister Abe has formed very close ties with Russia. He's reestablished good relations with China. And I believe this is because he knows that Trump basically wants this to happen. He doesn't want to see Japan go one way or the other, or South Korea to go one way or the other, or North Korea to go, but rather to bring all of the Asian nations together, as we have. It really began with the election of your president, when Duterte was elected by the Philippine people and rejected Obama's effort to provoke a war with China. And he just said, no, that's ridiculous. I want to be friends with America, but we're going to be friends with Russia and China as well. We must be. We must establish peace. We're not going to be a tool in a war provocation. So this sparked something which, along with what Trump has done in Korea, his work with the Chinese, has brought about a situation where really for the first time in all of history, the entirety of Asia is united around the idea of development. And all of the divisions, the imperial divisions of ethnic and religion and race and so forth, have been put aside in favor of an idea around this concept of the New Silk Road, championed by the Chinese, but as you know, an idea that was given birth by Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, that this is the genius of LaRouche, who saw back in the 1970s and 80s this concept of where the world must be in 50 years, and this concept of the New Silk Road was born from this vision of the future, determining what we as human beings today must do in order to assure that there is a future for mankind.
That's right. Now, I know we don't have you for too much time now, but your presentation, of course, Mike, has given us a lot of hope. Many of our viewers, I'm sure, are happy with these realities that are going on, and how President Trump is moving that towards a direction, and President Xi and Putin moving together towards the same direction of world peace and development. Now, what is the only thing, what might be the fly in the ointment that will prevent all of this? And whatever that is it real, and how imminent might that be?
I don't think you can say there's this thing, you know. We're dealing here with, as is said in the Bible, the battle of institutions. We're looking at a battle between the concept of empire, as we've lived under, even with the end of the official British Empire. It was through their control of the world financial structure that they maintained imperial policies, keeping the third world backwards, fostering these fake ideas like the green revolution, this new green thing that's anti-industry, anti-technology, which argues that man pollutes the world. Basically, it's anti-population, it's against the human race. Right. So we're in a battle over whether civilization is going to be governed by a failing, collapsing empire mentality, which has brought the world to the brink of global nuclear war, as well as pandemics and so forth, or whether we will in fact embrace the entire package not just fighting one fly in the ointment, but embrace the entire package, that mankind is on the brink of a breakthrough out of our childhood as a race, as a human race, out of our childhood into adulthood, where we don't fight like children throwing mud at each other, but we work as human beings together for the common aims of mankind through advancing science, advancing human knowledge, all of which lifts the productivity of every single human being, new discoveries, the implementation of new machine tools, going into space, opening our perspective, getting off of the earthbound mentality, which empire wants people to think small, to think of themselves as unable to affect the future. And this is a moment where that's why I think LaRouche and his death has to serve as an instigator of a global conception, which is required if we're going to win this war, that in fact we can, in a revolutionary moment in history like this, we can achieve things far, far greater than under normal circumstances. It's a moment of opportunity in which every single human being has to think about himself. What are his human qualities which have to be called forth in a sublime moment like this, in which your personal worth is recognized as what you can do to affect the fate of mankind in a moment of great crisis. And that's where we stand.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, well, as the last statement, I would like you to share with us the reaction coming from the rest of the world in the demise of this great man, Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. I had sent out our condolences to Helga and the rest of the organization, especially those that, and I feel proud and that I was just thinking out loud. One time I said, maybe my great-great-grandchildren will one day be bragging to their classmates that their great-great-grandfather was once a friend of this great man named Lyndon LaRouche. That is what that we see, and that's what we can feel. So we express our condolences again to you, to Helga, and the rest of the organization. Yes.
And we thank you. I read your statement. It's very profound. I encourage your listeners to be sure to read what you had to say. Yes. And I've been told that we have statements from our friends and around the world in great numbers coming in. I haven't had a chance to see them yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me on, Butch.
Thank you. Thank you. This is our first podcast of our through Skype. That this will be the first, I hope, of many more to come. Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, great.
Okay. Good. How was it?
Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. Tatlong pangunahing issue. Dayaan sa eleksyon dahil sa Smartmatic. Dengvaksya, genocidal scam. Mataas na halaga ng enerhiya, kuryente at tubig.
lumalaban sa mga nangaapi. Demokrasya ng bayan ay iniingatan, Pilipino'y lubos na paglilingkuran. Oligarko protektado ng epirano, kaya tubig at kuryente mataas presyo. KDP di papayagan to. KDP kasangga mo para sa pagbabago. KDP ay walang takot, ayusin ako sa gobyerno. Ang KDP, ang partido sa kinabukasan ko.
KDP para sa kinabukasan. Valdes, Casino, Haveliana, sa Hinula, Rojas, Chong at Gadon.
KDP hindi rin palalampasin, kalokohan ng Comelec, transmission ng data, bayuhang iswat, mapit na inutil magbilang, parusahan mga sindikatong sambuatan. Ang dating Pangulo ay pagbabayarin din, sa tingkang siya pumatay sa mga pasling. KDP ay lalaban, KDP kasangga mo para sa pagbabago. KDP ay walang takot, ayusin ako sa gobyerno. Ang KDP, ang partido